There's only so much space in a workshop. There's only so many square foot above and so many square foot on the floor. With new machines, new equipment, and a constant expansion of what we want to try to accomplish here, how do we maximize our space? And how many iterations of this is it going to take? Find out more on the Murdy Creative Co podcast. And welcome back to the Murdy Creative Co podcast. I'm your host, Colin Murdy, and today's episode is the Workshop Shuffle for new equipment. But first, I want to say thank you to everyone who supported the company so far. If you haven't got a chance, go check us out on the web at murdycreative.co. That's M-U-R-D-Y, creative.co. And please check out all of our social medias there, and please subscribe to our email list so you can get updates. First things first, we really like our current space. It has taken us 50 iterations to get to our current space. I have an office to myself for the first time. I mean, I share it with the photo studio, but it's an office. The admin office in the back there that was originally shared by Meryl and Anna and I is now divided with an actual wall so that Meryl and Anna each have their own little spaces. And we have a perfect amount of space for our cutting operations and our punching operations, which made sense, especially during our Christmas season when we were able to keep up with everything and it worked out great. And so, as always, the second we get it really good and everything's perfect, I gotta go change everything. And the big problem right now is the pens. So I've talked about that a little bit in the past, and I've mentioned it in a behind the scenes not that long ago, but with our pen prototyping process, and now as we've moved from the earliest stages of prototyping into a more proper sense of production, right? The prototyping's not done, but we're starting to move into the state of, okay, we need to be able to produce these at scale. There's been an addition of equipment that we need. And a reasonable amount of it, too. This is the one thing about moving from something like leather to something like pens, particularly an all-metal pen. Yes, the mill that produces our bars has been around for a year now. It's been in the workshop in its current spot for, well, soon to be about a year exactly, actually. And because of that, we don't need new space for that specific part. But the pens have a lot of additional things that need to go with them, specifically surrounding the coating that needs to go on the inside of the clicker to make it work. Now, we wouldn't have to do that if we didn't want to make pens that lasted 120 years. We could just make them all metal and not have any coating on the inside. But the problem is this: metal on metal components rub, and they create something called galling, which is a little fine dust that starts to form where the metal starts to shave off. To fix galling, especially in something as soft as 304 stainless steel, which is basically like chewing gum, you need to be able to have a really good coating. Now, the coating itself needs to have a smooth surface, high lubricity, and it needs to be able to be extremely durable, hard specifically, so that as the metal pushes past each other, that hard surface prevents any wear and tear from happening. Now, we found the perfect coating, and I'm very excited about this. And we're working on testing that coating in a much more rigorous way than it would ever experience in the real world. But beyond that, it requires sandblasting to coat it to the correct pre-coating surface finish. It needs to be then spray coated, and then it needs to be baked and oven cured, and there's a whole bunch of processes that go into it. And that's exciting, right? I love expanding the company's capabilities. It's important for us, in my opinion, for us to continue to add equipment to the workshop, to be able to build out our capacity to make new things, right? Adding the mill was a great addition. It allowed us to do things in metal that are awesome, right? The fact that we have a swing arm press that we use for stamping out the die stamped components for leather also allows for us to stamp out small metal components. Obviously, the machine itself has a certain amount of pressure, so there's limitations to that, but we could stamp out small parts. We're planning on stamping out things like the clip, because obviously stamping out something that's spring-based allows for a much more rigid and springy system. So for us, when we evaluate these different equipment functionalities, being able to add the ability to do sandblasting and spray coating and oven curing to an already awesome setup is exciting. It's cool to see the company expand. But there's only so many square feet in this place. And while the back warehouse of this building, we rent the front office space of what was enormous warehouse at one point, the back warehouse is 37,000 square feet. We're only in 2,700 of those front square feet, and it's set up as multiple smaller rooms. And that allows for us to have some nice division in spaces, but it also means that we're very limited in where we can put things. And Merrill has actually gotten very good at this. And we drew up originally when we first moved into the space. I spent some time drawing up what I described at the time as very accurate. I have now since learned that they're not quite as accurate as I might want them to be, but very accurate three-dimensional blueprints of the location so we can lay things out inside it in digital space to try to figure out if it works, because moving a bunch of heavy equipment is rather difficult. With this in mind, it actually has brought up a lot of conversation about workshop flow. Now, if I had the back warehouse, and maybe someday we will, who knows, maybe I'll buy the building eventually, but in the meantime, without that space, if we have to think about our limited space, the workshop flow is very important. If you think about an efficient production system, right? I'm thinking Henry Ford and making cars, right? The logical progression is for raw materials to come in one end, iterative addition to the main product is done in sequence, and then the final product flows out the other end of the factory. That's kind of the theoretical best version of this. Elon's talked about doing kind of a different variation on that theme, which is interesting because the assembly line hasn't changed in forever. So it's an interesting concept. And he's doing what we would describe as sub-assemblies in various areas. So rather than it all being built on one main line that's moving across, you have the chassis being built in one area, the engine compartment being built in another, the whatever, and so on and so forth, if you're thinking cars. And then those sub-assemblies are brought together in final areas. Now, to some extent, that makes sense, and a lot of other companies do it. It's not like he invented it, but we're not exactly like that, right? This isn't really like an assembly line. We're not making cars. This is a workshop where there's craftsmanship and there's the finessing that needs to happen at every step to some extent. There's artistic element and artistic expression in each of these pieces. So in that vein of things, we can't just have it be linear. And even if we could have it be as linear as we want it to be, we don't have the space properly set up for linear sets. So really, we have the workshop divided right now into kind of three basic areas. One large room is set up as the cutting, press, and mill room. So think of this as the room where raw material gets converted into some finished-esque thing. It's not the final product, but it's something that could be used in a final product. It's some part, right? The mill makes bars, for example. The cutting table cuts roughs, and the punching area punches those roughs into finished, precise designs, right? With the new expansion that we're looking at doing with our revision to a bag line, we need to fit new equipment in this particular room. And there's not a lot of extra space. With the addition of the pen finishing, we have to fit new equipment in that same room because we want to say, okay, if the parts are coming off the mill, they need to then go promptly into the next steps so that, well, it's for technical reasons. We want the passivization layer that forms to be minimal so that so that the adhesion of the coating is as precision it can possibly be and as whatever. Moral of the story is this. A lot of stuff's got to fit in that room. So that room is where raw material makes progress into some semi-finished or finished part. The engraving room is next. That has to obviously be relatively well sealed. We have incredibly robust ventilation systems that are designed to take any smoke generated by the process and run it through. It runs through two separate sets of filters. One that's designed to work for smoking lounges, and then the second set of filters is a HEPA filter before it's recycled. So we have very, very, very intense, and that's got to be a relatively sealed environment with very careful air monitoring and all those other things that go into that. So that's the engraving room. And then there's the next room, which is a much larger room where assembly happens. And so the shipping center and quality control and all that other stuff happens. And then things go out the door. So we've been trying to organize the workshop based off of the kind of the parameters that are the use cases of the various areas. It also is designed in part because we want to limit sound and noise pollution. And that's the right way to think of it. Because of OSHA requirements. Now, we're smaller than 10 employees, so the OSHA rules still apply to us. However, the reporting of incidents and things like that are a little bit less. It's complicated. But the moral of the story is this. We still want to follow good practices, right? We want to follow safety practices, not only because it's the right thing to do just writ large, but also because these people are my friends and I also work in this environment. So, we want to keep it as good as possible. So the mill is relatively loud. The press is relatively loud. The new equipment that we're going to be putting in isn't as loud, but it certainly is going to have some noise to it. So we want to try to limit and put all of the loud things in one room so that when people walk into the room, they can wear hearing protection if they need to, right? And if the noise is at certain levels. But we want to make sure that the engraving room, which has its own loudness, is not the same or is not spread out, because a lot of the stuff amplifies on top of each other, right? It adds up. And we want the assembly area to be relatively quiet, because obviously we want people to operate in peace while they're working on the final assembly and things like that. So that's a relatively quiet environment. All of this to say, when you're working in a workshop, there has to be a certain amount of dynamic adjustment. I feel like I'm rambling a little bit, so I'm going to kind of bring it back. As we have evolved, as we have adjusted as a company, we have gone through several major overhauls of these spaces. The room I'm currently sitting in was at one point leather storage, and quite a bit of leather storage. It was floor-to-ceiling leather storage. We realized that we could use an alternative way of storing it that was more compact. That was an evolution of our experience, right? The layout of our workshop has undergone major changes at least 4 times in the last 2 years. But every single time we got a little bit better. And this is really the core of what I want to get to. You have to be able to be flexible in your space. My roommate in college, bless his heart, loved to reconfigure our room about every 3 weeks. It was actually kind of a running joke. And I think he just liked the change. He liked the difference. I like things exactly the same for the most part. Not always, but... And so for me, it always drove me a little bit crazy. But you have to be flexible. The business itself is a living organism in many ways. It has to be able to grow and change and shift, and its capabilities have to be able to expand. And while the reality is there's only so much space, I have been shocked and surprised by how well we've been able to make new things fit in the same old spaces without having to sacrifice too much. Sometimes you think you've got the best layout, and then circumstance forces you to try to make it a little bit better. And at the end of the day, sometimes you actually do make it a little bit better. And if you would have said, well, I'm unwilling to even consider changing up the space, you would have never got that improved efficiency. The way a space is laid out is also incredibly critical for the way that people think about the space. In the early version of the workshop, we had a lot of really tall, high racking to take advantage of our relatively tall ceilings. And in hindsight, I realized that part of the problem was all of the racking and shelving that was used to store the leather blocked the windows. And it made it so that the space felt very dark, and having the shelves go all the way up to the ceiling meant that it felt very cramped. Ironically, we haven't lost much of our storage capacity, but by shifting the ways that we store our stuff and using smaller and lower shelves and having more open spaces specifically near the windows, it actually makes the workshop feel much more open and much more inviting and much less like an oppressive cave, which, if you're working in it for many, many hours a day, that's important, right? I have dreams of the workshop I want to build, and it's going to be awesome. We have to get out of our current debt circumstances before we even consider that, but I have ideas. And I think a lot of my current thinking on that workshop has evolved from the realities of our workshop now. I want big open spaces. I want lots and lots of floor space, because realistically, that's the king, right? There are a lot of equipment that we have that has to go on the floor, right? You can't suspend 2 tons of weight off the floor. That's not particularly practical. So floor space is important. But I think above 8 feet, 9 feet is also very important. And if I were to build a workshop, I would want at least 12 to 15 foot ceilings. And what I really want is I want it to be built up like a barn almost, where the ceiling goes way, way up. Because while it may seem like wasted space, while it may seem energy inefficient and that you have to heat that whole space and cool that whole space, and it's a whole thing, and that's true, don't get me wrong, and there are creative ways of solving that, but the human reality of an open space like that, the psychological ramifications of having that open space is so important to the health and wellness of the people that work there. If you work in a cave all day, it's really quite a dismal thing. But if you can work in a space that has a lot of open air and it feels like you're almost outside, it's so much space, well, that can really improve the way that you feel. And so as we work on shuffling the workshop once again to try to cram more things into a relatively small space, it is important for us to realize and recognize the things that we have learned in this time and to take advantage of those things. Now, I am hoping to do more behind-the-scenes videos and photos as we get the new stuff figured out. As we open up the new equipment and new capabilities, I am excited to be able to showcase some of this. I have been somewhat reticent in the past of getting too into the weeds about actually how things are made here, for a couple of reasons. One, when we were a lot smaller, it was a lot easier for people to copy what we do. And I'm not going to lie, we've gotten really smart and really clever with how we make things in a way that I think gives us a competitive edge. I'm a little less inclined to think that as we get bigger and bigger and do more and more things, because the reality is as we expand, we get to the point where for someone to truly replicate what we would do would take so much time and so much investment, and that'd be very difficult to do. So I'm excited as we get bigger and bigger and we expand out our capabilities, because it becomes more and more impossible for someone to truly copy us, which means I can be more and more transparent with exactly how things are made. So we'll get to more of that soon. But in the meantime, that's what's going on here. And it's fun. And I would say maybe you think to yourself, what can I change? What about my space might be worth changing? Maybe worth switching around just to see if I like it better. Because who knows? Maybe you might discover something that's a little bit harder to see beforehand. Anyway, thank you guys for tuning in. Please obviously tune in next week. And thank you so much. The special limited edition, what is it, clue? Hint? I'm going to go with hint. The hint this week is red bison. And I'm so excited about this one. But anyway, thank you guys so much for tuning in. I hope that you guys subscribe to the channel. Hope you ring the bell to get notified when things happen. Hope you click on the emails when we send emails to remind people about them. If you have any issues whatsoever or questions that you would like to get answers to, please reach out to us. You can find the contact form on the main page of the website. There's also links to be able to call us, text us. We're available Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. Central Time. We are happy to help with anything, really. If you want to leave us a review, go to murdycreative.co/review, and that'll take you automatically right now to Google's, where you can leave the Google review there. That really is helpful. And if you want to read our reviews, you can go to murdycreative.co/reviews with an S, and that'll get you to the page where you can read all of them. It really does help us. We hope you enjoy them. We do read them, every last one of them. I actually read them out loud sometimes to the team. So they really help us. If you have questions about a custom order, you can automatically build out your own custom order with custom logos and text and all that stuff on the website directly on the product pages for the most part. Most of them have a blue Add Custom Logo button. If you do not see that custom logo button, you can reach out to us and we can create you a custom mockup and a file and a link for you specifically that way. But otherwise, go check out those customizers built into the website. You can add logos and things like that. Please don't use copyright images. It becomes a whole headache for us, and it is a problem for you. So just don't use copyright stuff without permission. But you can go build your custom logo things. There's no minimum order quantities or setup fees. It's a simple flat fee per item, usually about $15. It depends on the size, complexity, and location. And you can get custom engraved items in bulk with bulk discounts by adding them to the cart and then adding and adjusting the quantities. It's based off the total cart discount quantity. So if you add 5 things, you get the 5 discount regardless of what those 5 things are. If you add 15 things, you get the 15% discount regardless of whether it's 15 of the same thing or 15 of unique things. So check that out. If you have any questions about that program, you can feel free to reach out to us and we're happy to walk you through it. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Have a great day and goodbye.